I want to apologize to my audience for speaking so fast in my previous videos. The problem is I'm trying to tell my whole life history in an hour, and in my mind I'm saying, you got to say this, you got to say this, and I'm just trying to cram too much information in all at once. So I'm going to deliberately slow down on this one so that I'll be more understandable and tell myself that, Gail, don't feel rushed, just tell the story as you need to. Jesus told me to make at least one video a week. And whenever Jesus tells me to do something, I always do what he says because he's God and he knows my life better than I do. So I do believe that we have a major legal case going on right now. And what the Jesuits are doing, in the past, they would usually just drag in one of my men and take him to court, like it would be Matthew McConaughey or Brent Spiner, and the case would center around that one man. But I believe the case has gotten really big right now, and they have dragged every single one of the men on my marriage list into court. And so I'm basically having to make videos to defend my entire marriage list. I feel a subject that I need to discuss right now is how the other men got on my marriage list. Everybody knows I've had Brent Spiner and Vladimir Putin. So now the question remains, how did Matthew McConaughey, Gerard Butler, Hugh Jackman, and these other men, from what I understand, the list comprises about 40 men, and it's a fluid list, and sometimes we take people off and we add them in depending on the latest intelligence we get. Like sometimes we discover that the man has been replaced with his clone, and we can no longer have him on the list. The Jesuits are always trying to eliminate my men. So let's go on to how the marriage list got started. And basically it got started with Vladimir Putin because I never intended to have a marriage list. My goal was just to be the wife of Brent Spiner. In December 1999, when I discovered that Laurie McBride was a Vatican agent, I just wanted to be with him, and I kind of shuttled Franco Nero off to the side and just let him be my platonic friend. And from what I understand, Franco Nero is now happily married to Vanessa Redgrave, and I'm very happy for him. So after Vladimir Putin, let me explain how the marriage list got started. I wanted to marry Vladimir Putin from about 2001 to, well, he's still on my marriage list, so it's not like he's been shuttled off, but it started in 2001. And I would like to state clearly that I firmly believe that Vladimir would never have been forced to marry to have a political marriage with Ludmila Putin if he didn't fall in love with me. I've noticed a pattern with famous men, or any man now, when they fall in love with me and want to marry me. The Jesuits waste no time to start a propaganda campaign on that man to start creating lies about his personal life in order to sabotage that man's attempts to marry me. It happened with Matthew McConaughey. So I can tell you without reservation that whenever any man falls in love with me, the Jesuits waste no time to create a public image about that man and to insert a woman or women into his life to create the impression that that man is not interested in me and that I just to suffer delusions. So, and I'll kind of go into that. They don't waste any time. Anyways, in 2005, when Vladimir Putin was the man that I was having, let me go a little bit into brain-to-brain sex first, okay? I want to explain a little bit how this works. Brain-to-brain communications work, but we borrowed technology from the Jesuits. When Vladimir Putin was the main man in my life, he hired his top scientists, we call that our nanotechnology research team, to do research on Jesuit futuristic technology, and we found that we could borrow some of this technology and use it for good purposes. They were using it for evil purposes, but we could use it for good purposes. And so we discovered around 2001 that the Jesuits had mind-reading technology, and that was just like the tip of the iceberg. And later, Vladimir Putin's scientists discovered that they were using that we could use satellites up in outer space using the mind reading technology, and using our mind reading scanners, we could read my mind and then read like Vladimir Putin's mind, and then use the satellite in space like it's the connector so that we could communicate. And Vladimir figured out a way, and we could also tap into the emotions of each person. Vladimir figured out a way where we could use satellite and computer technology, which would use the mind reading and emotion reading capabilities that we now had, that we figured out the Jesuits had, and that which we borrowed from the Jesuits. Jesuits have had mind reading and emotion reading technology for a while now, which is the reason they're so hard to defeat. It's kind of hard to defeat an enemy that can read your mind and emotions, and which is why they're so brilliant at public propaganda, because they know how people think and feel, so they can create a brilliant public press campaign to discredit me or my lovers, knowing how people think, and they're brilliant at manipulating public feelings and public perceptions. And they figured out that their best bet to knock me down is to get me portrayed as a paranoid schizophrenic. And it's been fairly effective, and some people are falling for it. Some people that aren't as smart as, as they need to be to deal with Jesuits. Jesuits are brilliant. So we'd use this mind-reading technology where Vladimir figured out a way where he could think a thought or feel a feeling, and we could transmit this using satellite signals, kind of like radio signals, to a satellite in outer space. Then that satellite in outer space could then transmit those thoughts and feelings to my brain using some sort of, kind of like radio signals. They're kind of like frequencies, and then I could actually hear his thoughts within seconds. Sometimes there's a delay because the Jesuits caused problems, or within seconds after Vladimir thinks the thought or feels the feeling. We were able to translate this into a way to make love, where Vladimir could, I believe they've actually created like dummies of me, a lifelike doll of me that looks like me and is programmed to have my feelings and my perceptions. And they actually make love to the dummy while they are thinking thoughts and emotions, which is transmitted to the satellite, and then which I receive. And then I don't have a dummy of them, but I just basically might borrow a pillow or whatever, and just, you might say it sounds like some masturbation thing. It's kind of like that there's a manipulation of the sexual organs involved, but it's not really sex, but it's intimate. What we do is we make up for the fact that we wish we could be married and we can't be married because the Jesuits create so many blockades between us. It's dangerous for my men to marry me right now. They want to marry me. It's not that they're playing games, but the Jesuits have made it plain that if any of these men try to get near me, that they're going to kill me. And they're going to try to make it look like my men did it. And that's the reason I haven't been able to marry any of these famous men on my marriage list, because the Jesuits, they're on to everything we do. They're like 3 steps ahead of us. With dealing with this organization is just incredibly challenging. So to make up for the fact that we wish we were married and we're not, we started brain-to-brain loving. And so the way it works is Vladimir can think something or feel something, and those feelings are transmitted by like radio signals to a satellite. Then the satellite will transmit those to my brain, and my brain receives it. We've figured out signals which the brain can receive, and which I can so that I can understand the thoughts and feelings of Vladimir, for instance. And we've put translation into the program so that he can think or feel in Russian, and I will receive those feelings and thoughts in English. It just translates. And if this seems far-fetched, I've got a language translation program right here on Microsoft Word that I can use, where I can type something in English and just translate it instantly in just about any language that I want. And I've already done it. You can see it at Church of Gail forum, on our churchofgail.com. I've done it. So if we can do that with a software program, it makes sense that with the futuristic technology we have, we would be able to translate languages. So that's how that works. And Vladimir discovered this around 2003, and he spoke. I was speaking to my mother in the middle of a conversation. At this time, I was living with my mother because I didn't have a job and I had no place to stay. And he said, Gail, and you say, how does it come across? It's not a voice. Okay, I'm going to make that clear. I'm not hearing voices. It's a thought that comes into your mind. And if you didn't know any better, you would think that maybe you were thinking to yourself, because sometimes you think to yourself with thoughts in your mind. And so, but the reason I know it's not my thoughts is because it's something that I wouldn't think of. So I figured out these thoughts have a distinct personality. So it's like, there's a distinct personality behind it. And I figured out it was Vladimir Putin because I kind of figured out what Vladimir was like through the bugs in my room, because I would communicate with him and then I'd go read the paper or that's why I'm so up on the news, is because I used to be able to go to the news and see, and Vladimir tried to talk back to me using the news media. He tried, because he couldn't write me. It was too dangerous. So he tried to talk to me using the news media, and I got really good at reading between the lines when I saw the news reporters on the news, or to try to figure out what he was saying to me. But with brain-to-brain communication, he no longer had to do that. He could start talking to me directly to my brain, which is what he did. So this thought came in my mind saying, Gail, can you go in your bedroom? Because I want to experiment with a new way that I think I found where I can make love to you by speaking to your brain with this mind-reading technology that we discovered from the Jesuits. So that's how it got started. So it's basically, you might call it masturbation on both ends, but with the thoughts and emotions of the two people being transferred through satellite, while we're imagining what it's like to make love with the other person. And to try to make it more real, sometimes when he's like when you might say he's masturbating on his side, but he's actually, there is like an interaction while it's happening. And if you want to be morally hard on me for doing this, imagine what it would be like to be in love with somebody and you want to marry them, and there's an empire out there that threatens to kill you or your partner if you try to come together. And, the moral thing is, Jesus knows that I want to marry these men, and they want to marry me. We're not playing games with each other. That's why I'm committed to them. And that's why since my divorce in 2001, I have not gone out on a date with any man. And that should tell you something right there. You say, oh, they haven't asked you out. No, I've been asked out, but I just tell them I'm taken, and I'm not lying. They say, well, you don't have a wedding ring. I said, well, I'm not into rings. So anyways, you're in love with somebody, you want to marry them, and there's an evil empire out there that's opposing your marriage, and you want to have communion with this person, and we found a way to do it. And it's really helped us to feel less lonely and less frustrated in the way that we want to express our feelings towards each other. So that's how it works. There's kind of like masturbation on both ends, but there's actual communication going on during the masturbation. And I even sense his feelings sometimes. It's been pretty accurate up until, I'd say, about 2012, February 2012. When Zach Knight, when we had a Church of Gail service and Satan actually showed up in the service, I believe he did. I mean, I heard him. I was on Skype and he showed up in the middle of the service, and then Satan entered into Zach Knight, and Zach Knight became the Antichrist. From that point forward, our brain-to-brain has not been too reliable. But fortunately, at this time, I had already established a written two-way communication with my men, so that has taken the prominence now, and I rely on that over brain-to-brain for accuracy of what's happening. And we use brain-to-brain now as a backup because sometimes the Jesuits make either me or my men so busy that we can't use our email or Skype communications. And But we realize that Zach Knight has hacked into the brain-to-brain servers, and he impersonates either me or my men brain-to-brain. So we realize that the brain-to-brain may not be too accurate right now. But it was fairly accurate up until February 2012. When Zach Knight became the Antichrist, it has no longer been very accurate. And Jesus has warned me not to rely on brain-to-brain for accuracy anymore. Because now that Zach Knight is the Antichrist, when Satan resurrected him from the dead in February 2012 and entered into his body, and we actually saw it happen in a Church of Gail service, Zach Knight is a computer master, just like the beast is going to be. That's why God gave the beast 666 a number, because he's a computer man. So anyways, that's how brain-to-brain loving is. Matthew McConaughey came into the picture in 2005 because the Jesuits gave Vladimir Putin a near-fatal heart attack. His heart was totally gone. I mean, he had such a bad heart attack that basically the heart just smashed. How do I say this? His heart was totally gone. It was like all the tissue got ruptured. He didn't have a heart. And we were worried he was going to die. The Jesuits gave him a really serious heart attack. And the only way we could keep him alive was the men that loved me, like Matthew McConaughey and Brent Spiner, and there were some other men that were interested in me. They took turns lying in bed next to Vladimir Putin and they connected his blood onto like Brent Spiner's body so that Vladimir's blood would pass through Brent's body, and Brent's heart had to pump for himself and Vladimir at the same time. And we were borrowing the men's hearts, other men who were in love with me and who wanted to support Vladimir during this time, and we were pumping the blood into Vladimir. So that lasted for I think a couple of weeks. And that was what kept him alive, was the other men that loved me, and we worked as a team to keep Vladimir Putin alive. Well, during this time, the doctors advised Vladimir not to try to make love to me. They said, we are in a very fragile situation right now, Vladimir. And if you try to do brain-to-brain loving, because even though brain-to-brain loving, the bodies don't meet, it's like masturbation. There's a climax. The heart rate goes up. So it could be bad for a person who's got a serious heart condition. So Vladimir couldn't make love to me for a whole month because he was at death's door, literally. And if it wasn't for men like Matthew McConaughey and Brent Spiner, and there were some other men, I'm not sure which ones, that were literally allowing Vladimir to borrow their heart so that they could pump blood back into Vladimir, he wouldn't be with us today. So Vladimir spoke to me. He said, Gail, I'm very seriously ill. I'm literally at death's door. The Jesuits have given me a horrible heart attack, and the only way I can stay alive is I have to borrow their hearts until we can we used satellite technology to create, we used Vladimir's own heart cells and used like a type of cloning technology, you might say, to clone his heart or create his heart and rebuild it genetically little by little over a period of a month. But until the heart was rebuilt, because it was totally shattered, we had to borrow other men's hearts to keep him alive. And he said, I want you to allow Matthew McConaughey to be a substitute husband until I'm able to make love to you again. And I said, Vladimir, I don't want to do this. I don't feel comfortable about this, Vladimir. Vladimir said, I insist. He said, I'm going to worry about you. He says, because I know from making love with you that you're a passionate woman. And I want your sexual needs to be met while I am unavailable to you. And he said, I promise that I'll be back, once I know that I'm going to live. But until my heart is rebuilt, Gail, he said, do it for me. He said, because if you don't have a lover in your life, then I'm going to worry that your sexual needs aren't going to be met and that you're going to be frustrated. I told Vladimir, Vladimir, I really don't need to do this. And he said, please, he said, it'll make it so that I don't worry about you while I'm going through this heart procedure. So I did it for Vladimir. He insisted. He said, and he said also, he said, I think very highly of Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey wants to do this. He likes you, Gail. In fact, he said that he wants to be in line possibly to marry you. I said, what? I said, he said, this guy's playing the lead in my novel, Silver Skies. I mean, Vladimir said, well, he's read your book, Silver Skies, and he fell in love with you after he read your novel, Silver Skies. And obviously, as an actor, he had to really know his part, and he got to know the author of the book, you know, that they based the screenplay on for the movie. So I said, all right, Vladimir, for you, I'll do it. But I really don't feel comfortable. He says, let me have Matthew McConaughey talk to you first, okay? So they put Matthew McConaughey onto the brain-to-brain servers, and he talked to me brain to brain. And Matthew said, Gail, I realize that this is sort of uncomfortable for you. He said, but I'm really impressed with you. I read your writing, and he says, I think you're the greatest writer on the planet. And he said, it would be an honor to me to be your lover for a month, just to keep Vladimir at peace. So I agreed to it. And Matthew, first thing I asked him about, I said, what about Penelope Cruz? Aren't you, I read in the People magazine, you know, that you got voted sexiest man alive, and what's going on with you and Penelope? And at this time, everybody thought he and Penelope were together. And I said, well, what's going on with you and Penelope? And Matthew said, well, he said, I've fallen in love with you, and Penelope and I have an understanding. And he said, it's not fair to Penelope that I'm dreaming about you. So I just decided to just cut it off with her. I said, well, all the magazines say you're still with her. He says, well, you know, they're not true, Gail. So so for 1 month, he was my brain-to-brain lover. And I was quite impressed with him. He seemed like very responsible, manly. What I really liked about him was his manliness, his Texas manliness, and he was very caring, tender, deep. This may seem surprising because there's a Matthew clone out there right now who's not coming across as deep, committed lover. And when our month was up, Matthew said, Gail, he said, after what I've experienced with you, he said, I don't want this to end. He says, but I'm going to bring you back to Vladimir, but I'm going to ask that I can be put in line to marry you in case Vladimir or Brent get killed and you still need a husband. He said, is that okay with you? I said, sure. I said, I mean, I don't want Vladimir or Brent to be killed, but if something should happen to them, I said, yes, I think I would like to consider you next. So I said, that's fine. And so that's how the marriage list got started. And then when Vladimir got his working heart back so that he no longer had to be connected to these other men to keep the blood flowing through his body, he came back into my life and was my primary lover, and Matthew just kind of got shuttled off to the side. You might say, well, how do you morally deal with this? You have to understand that we are dealing with life and death here. And I believe that Jesus understands that. And I actually talked with Jesus about this. I said, Jesus, they're accusing me of having adultery in my life because I've allowed these other men to be on my marriage list and that I've had brain-to-brain sex with about 5 or 6 of them. Do you know what Jesus said to me? I said, Jesus, don't you have a problem with that? He said, Jesus said, in the millennium, they're all going to be yours, Gail. He said, Brent Spiner's going to be your husband, but I'm going to let you have love with them if you want it. To have sex with them. I said, what? Jesus said, yeah. I said, but Jesus, doesn't that go against your laws of marriage? Is it going to be, you mean in the millennium you're going to have different laws for marriage? That people can go to bed with more than one person? And he said, no. He said, no, not really. He said, so you mean you're doing it just for me? He said, yeah, pretty much just for you, Gail. I said, why, Jesus? He said, and his answer to me was, well, he said, how does he talk to you? Well, when I speak to him, when Brent Spiner gets on Skype, sometimes Jesus will show up and he'll have Brent type what he has to say. He said, Gail, your ancestor King David had more than one wife and it was cool with me. That's the answer he gives me. And I said, that's all he tells me. I said, but Jesus, you don't mind? He said, Gail, David had more than one wife and it was cool with me. And that's the answer he gives me. And then he won't pursue it any further and he goes on to another subject. My guess is in the millennium, the Jewish law is going to be the law in the land. You know that anybody who knows their Bible realizes that God is not through with the nation of Israel. And under Jewish law, God allows certain people, especially if they're leaders, I've noticed he allows them, like Solomon and David, to have more than one wife. So I've never seen him do it for a woman, but he considers me, he says that I have masculine genes, and that's why he's using me. I don't really think like a woman. So that's what Jesus tells me. Okay, so now I have to explain Matthew McConaughey. So okay, you say, you've explained Matthew McConaughey. What about Hugh Jackman? What's your moral equivalency for and Gerard Butler? How do these others get in there? You say, so how much brain-to-brain loving have you had with Matthew? Well, it was pretty intense for about when Vladimir had the heart attack. It was November 2005. And it was just me and Matthew. And I really got to know him. You know, he even seemed like a husband to me. And he's a pretty cool guy, let me tell you. He's not at all like the way he's portrayed. And I can tell you from that 1 month that I had with Matthew, he would never, ever want a woman like Camila Alves. That woman is not his type at all. And in fact, she came... The Jesuits found it so threatening that Matthew McConaughey was interested in me that they inserted Camila Alves into... and let me explain, this will explain how some of the other guys came under the marriage list. Basically, all of us found that we were dealing with life and death situations, that the Jesuits were trying to kill me and kill my men. And because we're more than just a loving group, we work as a team to fight the Jesuit order. And Brent and I have discovered that we cannot fight them alone, that we need help. We're up against an empire, the richest and most powerful organization on earth. And we discovered we needed help just to stay alive. And that's how these other men got on the marriage list. And you got to understand something about Hollywood, too. Hollywood is a very small town. And let me tell you something. Everybody in Hollywood knows the truth about Laurie McBride and Camila Alves. Anybody who's big in Hollywood, they know the truth. Okay, Hollywood's a small town, and the gossip spreads around, and everybody knows what's really going on. Okay, Hollywood people are not stupid; they know. Okay, just about everybody in Hollywood who's the genuine person, like Keanu Reeves, they know the truth about Matthew McConaughey and Camila Alves. They realize that the Jesuits imposed Camila on Matthew and that Matthew's been in love with me since 2005. The people who don't know it are the general public who've been duped by the Jesuit press campaign to make it appear like Camila is Matthew McConaughey's woman. Well, anyways, Matthew McConaughey got kind of shuttled off, and I allowed Vladimir Putin to be my main man again. And Vladimir would talk to me. We started having fun with brain-to-brain communications. I think that's the best way to do it. We were having fun exploring this new technology. And I used to like to watch some movies. I'm not really a big movie person, but every now and then I'd see something that would really touch me. Who was next after Matthew? I believe it was Gerard Butler. Yeah. Sometime around, I think it was around 2008 or 2009, I was just watching Phantom of the Opera on cable television. And I really found believe it or not, I found the Phantom character in Phantom of the Opera attractive. And I just mentioned it flippantly to Vladimir. I said, wow, that Phantom in Phantom of the Opera is a sexy guy. I really like the way he's so open about his feelings towards that woman and how brave he was. And even though I may not admire how he carried it out, I admired I said his courage and his genius intelligence are very sexy. I told that to Vladimir. And Vladimir said, guess what, Gail? That Gerard Butler likes you. I said, oh, really? He said, oh, come on, Vladimir. So why are you telling me this, Vladimir? He says, well, he does like you, Gail. And he wants to know if he can be your brain-to-brain lover for a while. I said, Vladimir, why are you doing this? And actually, no. This happened afterwards. Okay. Let me tell you who the guilty culprit is, who's making me the adulteress. It's Brent Spiner. Okay. It was not Vladimir. I goofed on that one. I'm kind of, to be honest with you, I spend so much time brain to brain with Vladimir and Brent that I get kind of confused about the other ones because they're not as important to me as I hate to admit. The marriage list was not my idea, folks, okay? It was Brent Spiner's idea. And Gerard Butler. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so Brent Spiner came. I reinstated Brent Spiner after 2006 because Vladimir was just taking too long to marry me, and I figured I decided to give Brent a chance because I'd never really forgotten my Brent. So Brent Spiner became #1 in February 2006, and Brent Spiner's the one who told me this. He said, Gail, he said, that Gerard Butler likes you. And I said, oh, Brent, why are you telling me this? He says, well, can I let him be your lover for a while? Because we really need more men to help us fight the Jesuits. And it just really makes these men feel really good when you make love to them because you're really hot in bed, Gail. I said, oh, no, you've got to be kidding, Brent. I feel so guilty about this. He said, Gail, well, I'm going to let you talk to Gerard Butler. He said he's not going to force himself on you, but he wants to talk to you. So I talked to Gerard, and Gerard told, the first thing he says, Gail, I'm going to let you know something. I am a psychiatrist. I said, you are? He says, well, doesn't say that on the, out on the news and stuff. He says, yeah, he says, I keep it low key. He says, it's not something I want to talk about. He said, I actually have an MD degree as well as a law degree, and I have genius intelligence just like you. And he said, I would find it thrilling to make love to a fellow genius for a while there. And actually, the reason that Brent put Gerard Butler on there is they were thinking for a while of making him #1 on the marriage list. Brent was willing to go down to #2. I said, Brent, why are you doing this? And Brent said, well, he's really been helpful to us as a psychiatrist, and he's been counseling Matthew McConaughey. He says, he wants to talk to you about Matthew. So, and he said, when you make brain-to-brain loving with these men, you reward them, and they want to stay with us. It helps us to have more men on our side. He said, you're so hot in bed that these guys, once they experience you, they don't want anybody else. So, so that's Gerard. I had Gerard for about a month. And I think Brent Spiner did this on purpose because being a guy, he knows how to reward his fellow men so that we can have more people on our side to fight the Jesuits. You may say, oh, these guys are just being sexually irresponsible and they're just using you and they don't plan on marrying you or not. I don't believe that because for any man to get involved with me, they know right off the bat they're going to be a target by the Jesuits. So it takes tremendous courage for any man to go on my marriage list. Because once they get on that list, the Jesuits go after them. They start sending them their women and putting lies about them out in the news media. So that's just a bunch of Jesuit crap. These men are good men. But I had Gerard for a month, and he started telling me about Matthew. He said, I want you to go to Matthew and make love to him. So it sounds like you got a thing going. Like my pattern has been like this. I only make brain-to-brain loving with my men to minister to them when they're going through a stress and they need me. Because I don't know what it is about me sexually, but when I have brain-to-brain sex with them, I heal my men through emotional traumas. So Gerard told me that Matthew was depressed because of Camila Alves, because she impregnated herself with stolen genetic material from Matthew McConaughey and was going and using that in the media to make it appear like she had a relationship with Matthew, and he was really depressed because it made him feel like he betrayed me. So I comforted him over that, and then he got over it. My lovemaking heals my men, so that's why I do it. And then when I was done, and when Matthew was over his depression, he says, okay, I'll take you back now, Gail. And then he says, now I think I'm going to give you back to Brent Spiner. And he said, you know what, Gail? He said, after having experienced you for a month, he says, I agree with Matthew. I want to have you. So he says, I'm going to be like number 4 on your marriage list now, but I'm going to let, he said, I still think Brent should be number 1, so I'm going back. I'm going to give you back to Brent. So that's the way it works. He said, what about Hugh Jackman? He said, Hugh Jackman. Okay, how did that happen? Oh. I haven't had it with these guys recently, so I can't remember. How did that happen? Oh, with Hugh Jackman. Oh, I remember right away. Usually what happens is when they say they're going to put a guy, they're going to have me with brain to brain with one of these guys, I go online and do research about them to learn what's being said about them. Well, right away I said, wait a minute, Hugh Jackman is married. I said, Brent, I can't go to Hugh Jackman. He's got a wife and he's got these adopted kids. He says, yeah, I thought he was attractive when I saw him in, what was it? I noticed him in one show. Oh, great. It was with him. You can tell that I haven't had it much with these other ones. Because I have moral scruples about it. But I noticed him in a movie he was in. It was a romantic comedy. God, the Jesuits, they've just taken that movie out of my mind. It was with a... Lord, let me go get the movie. I'll be right back. So, Lord, those Jesuits are messing with my mind. Oh, Lord. Where's that movie? No, it wasn't Australian. That's not it. No, here it is. Yeah. It was Kate and Leopold. I believe, you may find this hard to believe, but I had never heard of Matthew McConaughey till 2005. Because I'm not really into watching movies. And I never heard of Hugh Jackman, believe it or not, until this movie here, Kate and Leopold. So I saw him in Kate and Leopold and said, well, that guy is attractive. I mean, you got to admit, even if you're married, don't you watch a movie and think some star up there is kind of attractive? So I thought he was attractive in Kate and Leopold, so I just casually mentioned it to Brent and said, hey, and then Brent said, guess what, Gail? Hugh Jackman has liked you for over a year, man. In fact, he's adored you for over a year, and you didn't know it. See, once Matthew McConaughey made love to me, apparently the news spread throughout Hollywood that I was this hot brain-to-brain lover, and the other Hollywood hunks found out about me. Like I said, Hollywood's a small town, so they decided to investigate. Said, boy, we got to find out why this woman's so hot and see if we want to get in here. So that's hot. So apparently Hugh Jackman knew about me, and he thought, and he jumped at the chance to have brain-to-brain loving with me. I said, wait a minute. I said, Brent, he's married. You know I'm not going to go have any brain-to-brain loving with a married guy. He said, Gail, I need to explain something to you. He says, in fact, I think I'm going to let Hugh explain it to you. So they put Hugh on to my brain-to-brain loving. I said, all right, Hugh, I am not going to have brain-to-brain loving with you because you are married. And Hugh Jackman said, no, I'm not, Gail. He said, that's just a big thing I'm doing. I mean, he says, I'm doing this in public to protect you. He said, but let me tell you what happened. He said, I was in a very happy marriage with my wife, and the Jesuits murdered her and replaced her with a clone. He said, I have been heartbroken over this. He said, I was devastated. They killed my wife, Gail, and they replaced her with a clone. He said, and ever since then, he said, I found out about you, and I've gotten comfort in thinking about possibly having you as my wife. And I said, really? He says, well, you know that I have Brent Spiner. He says, yeah, I know. He says, he says, all of us here in Hollywood, we already know what's going on. We've heard about you and Matthew McConaughey, and we know about you and Vladimir Putin. He said, would you let me be on your list? And I said, wow. I says, I'm really honored. I said, because you're kind of hot, I says, how do I get all these guys that are, like voted sexiest man alive? Not that I really give a flip about that stuff. I'm not sure whether I agree with their assessment on. I said, but I agree with them. I think you're. When I saw you in Kate and Leopold, I thought you were pretty sexy. And he goes, and I like masculine men, and all of the men have to be macho, and you're macho. So he said, well, he said, can I try you for a month? I said, but Brett Spider's my main man. I feel so. He said, I'm really committed to you, Gail. So that's how Hugh Jackman got on there. I tried him for a month. He's pretty hot. Pretty masculine. So I thought, wow. I said, I'm getting. So finally I said, but Hugh. He says, I know, Gail. I'm going to let you go back to Brent now. But he says, but I'm going to stay on the list, man, because he says, once I experience you, he said, I don't want anybody else. You're it. So I said, look, Hugh, you are free to go, and if you want to make that clone wife your wife, that's fine. He says, no, I don't want to do that. He says, I want you. I said, this is the marriage list, folks. And what these men are, we're actually finding it quite useful to have a team here because we are up against the Jesuits. And he said, not only that, he says, I'm going to help your Brent fight the Jesuits. He said, because I'm really angry at them, Hugh told me, for what they did to my wife. And he says, and I want to help you fight them, Gail. And Matthew feels that way, and Gerard Butler feels that way. Gerard Butler has stayed on as the psychiatrist, and he's basically the psychiatrist for all of my men. And you say, who else got him? For a while there, they added Vyacheslav Tikhonov, who was a Russian actor. And they lied to me about him and said he was close to my age because they knew if I knew how old he was that I may not, want to mess with him brain to brain. And the Jesuits killed him. They took him out, I think it was 2009. That's been about it. You say, what about the others? The others, nothing significant brain to brain because I'm not really into this. It's just that we discovered this new technology and we were experimenting with it. But apparently I'm just so hot in bed. I may not be that hot looking, though they think they disagree with this. They say, oh no, Gail, we think you're hot looking. I said, nah. I said, my teeth are crooked, I'm not young chicken anymore. I said, why don't you go for some of those younger women out there? He says, no. He says, once we experience you, we don't want anybody else. You are hot in bed, Gail. Nobody makes love to us like you do. You say, what do you think it is? Well, let me tell you what it is that turns me on about a guy. I find a guy attractive if he's a red-blooded male. So when I make love to them, I nurture their manliness. I feel like I'm making love to a hero, like a knight in shining armor, a red-blooded macho male. So by the time they're through making love to me, they feel like a red-blooded macho male. And I think that's why I stand out. Because, see, the problem with women like Camila Alves and Laurie McBride is they demasculate the men. They make these men, if you know anything about a real man likes to feel like he's a red-blooded, macho, masculine guy, right? Okay? So there's something about my lovemaking, even though I may think like a man, that's what Jesus says. He says, you have very manly genes. When I make love to the man, I make that man feel like a hero. I make him feel like he's the most red-blooded macho guy on planet Earth. So by the time they're through, so how do you do it? Well, it's because the number one thing that I find sexually attractive about a man is his manliness. I do not like a wimp in bed. I like my man to be a red-blooded male. And that's what turns me on sexually. And they sense that. And the guys eat it up, man. They love it. And that's why women like Camila Alves and Laurie McBride depress my men, because when those women rape my men or hang around them, they make the man feel like a wimp, like he's not a man, where I am the opposite. I make them feel like a hero, like a man. That's what I think my secret is. I think that's why I'm so hot in bed. You got to understand, if a man is a macho guy, he's attracted to a woman who makes him feel like a macho guy. Get it? If the woman makes him feel like a wimp, he's not going to want her. I make my men feel like a macho guy, and I let them lead in the relationship. Not that they enjoy having me initiate sexual stuff with them, but generally they lead, and I respond to them. And the more masculine they are with me, I really love it, man. You may say, well, Laura McBride seems to like masculine. She's not. She demasculates her men. She rapes them. She the type of sex she has is so vulgar and so crude and so animal-like that they don't feel like a man when they're through with her. They feel like a worm. They feel totally demasculated. I don't think I made up a new word in the English language. Anyways, but because I am a woman of honor, Brent Spiner's been getting 96% of my brain-to-brain loving since February 2006. So I just wanted to explain how the other guys came in. You may say, oh, we just don't believe that they would be committed to you and all this blah, blah, blah. Well, first of all, don't believe the stuff you read about them in the press. Once a guy gets on my marriage list, you can't believe anything you read about them in the press or what's in the videos. And you have to understand cloning technology does exist. So the Jesuits are going to put lies out there to make me appear crazy. They're going to put the man's clones out there. Like the Matthew McConaughey clone has been going to town with Camila Alves. The real Matthew McConaughey is not married to Camila Alves. You may say, what about the pregnancies? The Jesuits take me very seriously. They consider me their greatest threat. And in order to make their lies appear believable, they deliberately impregnate their women using artificial insemination with the man's stolen semen. And Camila Alves, I think, has done this 3 times now. She's impregnated herself using artificial insemination. They may be using other methods too, but whatever methods they're using, it is not willing and knowing sex with the authentic and real Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey was really depressed about it now, but because I'm so brilliant and so good at defending him, he's not, and he's been able to communicate with me now through Church of Gail that he's no longer depressed because he has faith in me and in my Jesus. And this is the best part of it all, and that is that Jesus Christ is on our side. Because I said, Jesus, what about these other guys on the marriage list? What are you going to do with them in the millennium? Jesus said, they're going to be there too, Gail. He said, Brent Spiner's going to be your main man, but in the millennium, I'm going to let you make love to one of them every now and then. That's from Jesus himself. And like I said, I don't get the morals to this. He said, the only answer Jesus will give me is, well, King David had more than one wife, and it was cool with me. And you're like King David.